Hello and welcome to Raisina 2019. We're coming to you from the Facebook studios where also we're trying to have some very meaningful conversations around issues and challenges that we are facing, the world is facing collectively today, and these are issues that are inevitably going to shape our tomorrow, our future, which is why these are important. And this is of course why that it's my great privilege to welcome my two special guests. And before I introduce them, a quick look at our topic. We are looking at liberal democracy on life support. Will the internet kill it or save it? I'm sure all of you have your thoughts and opinions on this, so keep those coming in as well. But please meet my panel now. I'm joined by Marietje Schaake, member of the European Parliament, and Katie Harbert, Director, Global Politics and Government Outreach at Facebook. Well, it really is wonderful having you both here. Not just, I don't want to sort of go on about women, but women participation. 40% of our delegates and participants are women, so that's great, and you know this is more proof of it. But also because we've got government and technology platform together here on this panel, and this is a conversation that I think is very important to have. And I want to start by asking you, the relationship between the two seems to be tense, tenuous, even antagonistic between governments and technology platforms today. Does it have to be so? Is there a way out without it being this way?
Let me just clarify a few things. I'm a parliamentarian, so
yes,
I don't represent a state or government organization as such. I feel like I'm a people's representative, and I think that that's really important. But there is tension, I believe, between especially the very powerful tech platforms like Facebook, but also others, YouTube, Google, Instagram, WhatsApp, etc., and how their business models that are really advertising driven and data broker driven can actually create new kinds of challenges worldwide. There's a lack of transparency oftentimes in terms of how business models work, why certain information surfaces. It could be harmful, it could be conspiracy theories, it could even be contentious, for example, on health issues. We have a whole debate in Europe about vaccination and whether it's healthy or not. So when people get misinformed, or when political actors can manipulate the platforms either by simply paying, but also by understanding how the ranking system works, how to reach people in a smart way, it can have an erosive effect on liberal democracy. And I think we've seen that around the entire discussion in the US, in Europe, and I'm sure here in India as well, about disinformation and what it can lead to. A rumor about someone can lead to violence, even if it's entirely false. So this polarization, this hyping and inflation of certain messages that get people very emotional, very angry and willing to act, I think these are all trends that we have to be very mindful of, and I wish we had more transparency over the algorithms and the business models that the big tech companies use.
Katie, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, and I think that you mentioned the tension, and I think it's a healthy tension. And I think that we are all asking the right questions of one another. And I think what we are trying to do at Facebook is we are working on trying to bring more transparency in many things. Political advertising, for instance, both the European Union and India have elections that are going to be coming up here in April and May, and that is something that we are working towards in both of those for that. And we are wanting to work. We find that I think the solutions to these problems are going to have to require government, companies, civil society coming together to determine what are the right answers for these types of issues and what are the right paths forward. And so I think that it's right that we're holding all of ourselves accountable and each other accountable, and having these hard conversations with one another so that we can get to the right point of what is smart regulation for the companies and what are the different roles that governments, places like Facebook or other third parties should play.
Absolutely, and I think that both of you are spot on the fact that there's a lot of spotlight on these issues, and we're talking about them a lot more, and there's of course bound to be differences of opinion, but I suppose that's how solutions will come up, because there is this kind of debate. But Marietje, I want to come back to you. Katie mentioned regulation, and regulation is key, because again, one thing that we're again talking about in India is when we look to regulate, or how much is too much, and how far should parliamentarians, how far should legislators or governments really go, because there's the issue of privacy, there's the issue of rights, and all of this can sort of then also be misused or also suffer in a sense. So it's a balancing act.
Well, regulation is a very broad term, and politicians will disagree, and will have to find majorities behind what is the appropriate approach. And I frankly don't think it should be a dialogue between companies and politicians, and then just, you know, they would propose something. No, it's the role of lawmakers, the role of governments to preserve the public interest, which is fundamentally different than the profit-driven models that a lot of these companies have. And so where I think you can start is with making sure that laws that apply offline, such as non-discrimination or the right to privacy that you mentioned, or access to information, but also fair competition, more economic rights, that they also apply online. And this is easier said than done, because again, sometimes the reach to a company can be very difficult. If you're in India, how do you reach all the way to Silicon Valley to make sure that the company adheres to the laws? In some countries, these companies are not present, so you cannot speak with anyone very easily, even though there's an entire dynamic, like we've seen in Myanmar, with genocide playing out also online. So I think it is very important that we be much more ambitious to make sure that rights that apply offline also apply online. And that is also a way for citizens, if they disagree with the laws, to know how they can use their own political systems to change the laws. And then perhaps in some cases, like I believe in the cases of algorithms, we will need new mechanisms to ensure transparency, because algorithms, but also artificial intelligence, create different kinds of challenges that may require new laws or new safeguards. For example, liability between a machine and a person, and a company and an individual. It could create a different kind of dynamic with the increased use of machine learning, self-driving cars. But if we can start with laws applying online as they do offline, it is a very good start. And it also gives citizens a transparent avenue to change laws if they want to.
It's interesting you would say that, because that's the point that Katie also made last evening in her session, where you said that, you know, online, offline is so much of the challenges. I mean, look at us here in India. We're grappling with, say, hate speech. You know, we're seeing that offline, and it sort of mirrors itself online as well. Bullying, harassment. So a lot of that happens. Would you agree with what Marie-Jay said? And
I do. I think that this is where a lot of the challenges are coming with, and where all of us are trying to think through because the issues of fake news, of foreign interference, of bullying, hate speech, all of these have existed before the internet, but they are amplified online. They can spread more quickly. They can be seen in front of a lot more people than what may have happened before. And I think that we do need to find the right ways of finding that balance to make sure that that we are protecting people against those types of things that might be happening, but also making sure we're not necessarily curbing speech. And absolutely. I do think that that's something I know us as a company are committed to. And there are going to be things that work, and there are going to be things that don't work. And we have to keep trying and finding the right balance of what those are, and does it make sense to do the same thing offline versus online? I'm not sure if that's the right path to go. It could be, sure. But I think that's why we're at the very beginning of having these conversations. Companies like ours grappling with how to handle these issues, and governments grappling with what they need to be doing in order to be protecting the safety of the public.
Yeah, but I want to be a little bit more sort of provocative on this, because you know, Facebook is now a massively powerful company, and we have had conversations with you as lawmakers for years about your responsibilities, about the lack of transparency in the algorithms, about the risk of knowingly or unknowingly being manipulated by political actors, by others that want to do harm or want to make a profit through your business model. So I think it is a little bit too easy to say, oh, we're just beginning to grapple, while the impact is so massive. So if you are a company, just like a country, and you have a lot of power, if you're a state that has a lot of power over the people, or if you're a company that has a lot of power over your users or over an environment that is the online ecosystem, it should come with big responsibility. And I think that there has to be a massive step forward in acknowledging that from the private sector, including your company, but also taking more action and not saying we're beginning to discuss. It is not good enough. It has to be a stronger commitment to safeguarding the public interest before it's too late. And I think the backlash will be against the companies just as much as it will be against liberal democracy, which is the topic of this panel. And that's what I think we should ask more of ourselves than beginning conversations.
And I 100% agree with you on that. I think we fully acknowledge that we should have been looking at these issues much, much sooner. And there were many people that were telling us that we should have looked at these much, much sooner. All we can now control is what we can do going forward. And we have a long way to go in terms of the steps that we need to do. We've done many already. You know, I'm more focused on the election side, and so the political ad transparency is something that I'm particularly excited about in bringing to more elections this year, so that people do know who's paying for these ads and who is behind them, and really what is the money that's happening, and making sure citizens have that information. So I completely agree with you, and I think, you know, that is our intention, and we have a long way to go to build back public trust. But that is very much our intentions and our goals and how we want to be moving forward.
Okay, just I'm told that we are running out of time, but just one last question each. And my first to you is, you know, of late we've been in India also looking at what can individuals do, what can we as a society do, because it's, you know, it's okay, it's government, it's tech platforms, that point's well taken, but what can all of us do, because we all have a stake in this. What would you say that is? I mean, besides, of course, be informed, be in the know, track things that are happening, don't be caught unawares.
Yeah, to the extent that an individual can
do.
I think it is always good to get information from multiple sources and to be critical of the sources that are feeding information. I think we see enormous polarization fueled by the business models of big tech platforms, not just Facebook, but also YouTube, for example, where conspiracies, hateful messages rise to the top of the ranks so fast because it triggers people, it triggers emotions. You know, it's more exciting than a nuanced story. And I think that people have to realize that, you know, there's multiple sources online. It is also good to be offline, to go take a walk, to play sports, and not to be completely obsessed and almost addicted to these social media platforms, because these are environments that are becoming increasingly confrontational. And I think our societies, if anything, they need people to come together, not for differences to be magnified
apart,
and people to be standing in opposition to each other, virtually screaming at each other. You know, I always wonder when people say strongly worded messages to me on social media, whether they would tell me the same thing face to face. Because I think the screen also creates a sense of, you know, frivolousness, where people simply are daring to say very strongly worded messages to each other, to strangers, on websites, to politicians, maybe to people they don't agree with, to celebrities that they may have an opinion about.
There's an anonymity also there, you know, which you're hiding behind the screen and you're not known. You may or may not be using your real name. You could be anywhere. So I think all of that, you see a lot of that on.
Definitely, but I think anonymity has a role so that people can be free to speak their minds, but I think there's also a good sense in taking a pause sometimes and wondering, you know, what am I doing with my time? Is this how I want to spend the day? Do I want to fuel my angry emotions the whole time? Do I want to click on ads and silly blogs that are clickbait, that are really wasting my time? And I think while we don't have regulation for how people should spend their time, this is something that individuals can do, be informed, read multiple sources, and also be critical of their own use of the online possibilities.
Absolutely, and I think that we've really grappled with that in India. People need to be more circumspect, you know, because very often anything that comes your way, you believe it as the truth, and we've seen the tragic consequences. But last question to you, Katie. This is where I suppose one of the things that you'll be working on ahead of the India elections will be digital literacy.
Absolutely. We're focusing on protecting the integrity of the elections on the platform, but also supporting an informed and engaged electorate. I think I agree with everything that was said, and I also would say to everyone, be civically engaged, offline and online. Be holding your elected leaders accountable, be talking to, building up in your community, be engaging on the issues that matter to you, making sure you're getting all viewpoints, understanding who's really going to represent you in the way that you want to in Parliament, and that should be done both, you know, offline and online in a very smart way. And our goal is to make sure that our platform cannot be manipulated in a way towards people on that, but then they also have the right information and the tools that they need in order to get that information.
Right. So learn to use these platforms and
Yeah.
not necessarily be used by them, I suppose, and
Yes.
that would be a good way to say it. Well, thanks so much for your time. Pleasure to have, to be able to discuss these kind of topics, hot topics, see the difference of opinion, but manage to do it civilly. And this is, of course, what hopefully we will be able to carry to social media as well. Katie Mariche, thanks so much for your time. Pleasure talking to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.